We talked about the for loop in the previous lecture. We said that a for loop is a way of repeating a certain task or um, a statement a certain number of times. So there are three elements in the for loop: the starting value, and then the condition, and then the incrementation or decrementation. Okay, so you have to have these three elements for the for loop to work. Now, there is another type called the while loop. So we're going to explain what the while loop is, and then we're going to answer a question that some students have, or most students have. Why do we have to have two? What's the difference between the two? Shall we use like any one of them? Is there any difference between the two? So we'll talk about that later. Now, the while loop, you start first with the variable, and then the starting value, let's say I equals 1. And then you put while, make sure it's lowercase, and then you put the condition. So we have the same three elements that we talked about. It's just like in a different way, different order. So here we start with the variable first. You have to start with the value, and then you put the condition. For example, as long as I is less or equal than 10, and then put the brackets. Do the following. For example, system out print line, I like Java. Okay. Now here we are missing one element. Now if you run the program the way it is, you can have an infinite loop. Why? Because the value of I equals 1, I is less or equal than 10, so the Java will print I like Java and then go back and do the same thing again. But you always have the value of I equals 1. It will never change because there is no statement that's going to change the value of I until you get to a point where that condition is false. So if you leave it like that, you're going to have definitely an infinite loop. That's why we have to change the value of I. For example, you can put I plus plus. So 1 will change to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once you get to 11, that condition next to while will change to false, and that's what's going to stop the computer from running. Okay, so now if you run the program, you're going to see that it is 10 times. Okay. Now we can even show the value of I to show you the process that this program goes through. So we're going to have I next to that statement. So it's going to show I equals 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. Okay. Now I can do the same thing by incrementing by 2. So increment by 2, so it's going to be printed half times, which is 5 times. Because I'm skipping. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay. Now, then I have a question here. Does it make a difference that I start with an increment before or after I print the statement? For example, let's say I have I equals plus plus before. So is there any difference? Does it impact the output? Of course it does. Why? Because you are incrementing before you're printing. So the value of I, the starting value, is 1. So it's going to pass the condition because it's true. Then you're going to increment before you print. That means I will change to 2 before you print. So when I equals 1, the statement will not be printed. Okay? Why? Because you are adding 1, it's going to become 2, then you print. So when you run the program, you're going to see this. So it's going to start from 2. And then once you get to 10, if I equals 10, so it's going to pass the test, right? The condition. Why? Because 10 is less or equal than 10. But once you are inside, it's going to add 1 before you print 11. But the next time, it's not going to pass the test. Why? Because 11 is not less or equal than 10. So you have to be careful about the order of the statements because the order has an impact on the output. Okay, and now just like what we said about the for loop, you can also go backwards. So for example, I can start from I10, but in this case, you have to change the symbol to higher or equal than, and then the I plus plus will be I minus minus. Why? Because we're going backward. So it's going to be I minus minus. So this is the same thing. The only difference is you are going backward. Oh, I forgot to put semicolon here. So now run the program. So we're going to say 10 times, the same number of times, but we are going backward from 10 to 1. Also, we can skip. So we're going to go by 2. So you're going to get 5 times I like Java. 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. So the same thing, the mistake made by many students, they forget and they put the semicolon here. So when you put semicolon here, you are separating the while statement from the rest of the statements, because semicolon means you are ending the statement, you are terminating the statement. Okay, so be careful, don't put that. Okay, another mistake is sometimes they forget and they put while loop. So as you can see, it's not even in blue, so that means that's not a Java term. So make sure it's lowercase. Okay. Okay, so that's basically the while loop. Now the questions, go back to the question we asked at the beginning. Why do we have to have two? What's wrong with the for loop? Why do we have to have two types? Now the answer is, for the for loop, there are most of the times it doesn't really matter which type you use, for loop or the while loop, whatever way or whatever type you feel comfortable using. But there are some situations when you have to use a certain type, when it is preferable, even required to use a certain type. So the for loop, usually we use it when we know how many times, like we have a fixed number of times, like 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. When we know ahead of time how many times we're going to be repeating the task, then the for loop would be appropriate. Now the while loop, when we don't know how many times, then the while loop has to be used. Let me give you an example. Let's say I want to create a program that's gonna, let's say, a program to check if the password is correct or not. Now, how many times the user will try to type the password? It depends. Sometimes he may try the first time, it will work. But sometimes if he forgets, he may try 2, 3 times. So in this case, you cannot use the for loop because you don't know ahead of times how many times it's going to be repeating or trying to put the password until he gets the right password. So in this case, you have to use the while loop. As long as the password, the real password, does not match with the guess or whatever entry the user used. So as long as they don't match, it's going to keep asking you try again, try again, try again. So this is one of the situations when we cannot use the for loop. We have to use the while loop because we don't know ahead of times how many times a certain task will be repeated. Okay, so thank you so much for watching and see you in the next lecture.